I'm joined now by CGTN's current affairs commentator, Einar Tangen in Beijing. Einar, let's begin with the DPRK discussions at ASEAN. Singapore previously hosted, as we know, the summit between Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump. So as regional neighbors, can ASEAN countries have more influence on the peace process there in the peninsula? And also, we know that China and the U.S. envoys had something to say on this issue as well.
Well, peer pressure is always a wonderful thing, but I mean, this is a very complex issue, really involving the U.S. and the DPRK, especially as to the nuclear issue. No one wants to see a nuclear arms race in Southeast Asia. ASEAN certainly doesn't. It would divert precious resources away from what is now a very fast-growing economy. So I think there's a tremendous desire to see some sort of acceptance of the DPRK, but not as a nuclear entity, but really as a trade entity. And perhaps there's going to be more pressure to come to some sort of resolution on sanctions.
What's your take on the DPRK's foreign minister being there in Singapore with Wang Yi and Mike Pompeo? Could something happen there on the sidelines?
Probably not. I mean, Kim sent a letter to Donald Trump. He seems to be going back and forth. I don't know if this is a crab-like way of negotiating, but their stances are very, very, very different. If you look at what the DPRK seems to be indicating, it goes back 26 years ago. Their definition of denuclearization is basically the U.S. withdraws from South Korea, both troops and its mutual defense treaty, sanctions come down, and they're allowed, and it takes place over a long period of time. The U.S. has a very, very different stance. They want everything to happen within a very short period, year or two at most, and they would want unrestricted access to make sure that everything was taken care of. In terms of ASEAN, ASEAN is really kind of turning into a battleground or a competition ground between these different entities. You have people floating this idea of Indo-Pacific. You have Russia, China, the U.S., India, all there trying to make inroads, trying to convince this sizable trade bloc of $2.4 trillion to basically be friendly as they go forward with their different agendas. The U.S. Concerned about the DPRK, China, and Iran. China concerned about security and peace, regional peace. Russia keeping a firm eye on this in terms of resources. Iran, the same in terms of exports and things like this.
And so, Einar, given all of what you just said, how would you describe China's current relationship with the ASEAN bloc making headway, some would say, in recent years?
Well, I think they are. There's always a little trepidation because China's growth has been so meteoric, and people are wondering exactly how that goes. But I think the Belt and Road Initiative and there's just the one-on-one, continuing, very, very predictable stance that China has towards ASEAN has been very good. You know, there was a joint, not actual, but cyber defense exercise between China and ASEAN, and it went very well. I think these are the kinds of direct things. But on a larger scale, you know, you look at the developed world versus really what is the emerging and developing economies. And it's going to be interesting to see which side this developing economic area, all except Singapore, which side they take on this. What is closer to their vision of where they want to be economically and politically.
Einar Tangen, always great to have your take. Thank you for joining us from Beijing.